Hey everyone, it's Justine and welcome to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be showing you 4 different techniques in order to be able to make 2 cards super easily. So all 4 of these techniques, when you do them, end up easily producing a second card, because who wants to sit down and make just 1 card when you can make 2? It's a great time saver and these are amazing techniques, so let's get started. Alright, so for my first technique, we're going to call it the black and white technique for a name purpose. I'm going to grab a piece of black and white cardstock, both measuring 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I'm going to be stamping off of my cardstock, which means I can't put it in the corner of my Misti. So I'm going to grab some purple tape and mark off this left corner here exactly where it is so that I know where to stamp. This technique is really important that you stamp on the black and the white cardstock in the exact same spot, and this allows me to do this. If you want to skip this step, I would suggest grabbing a stamp that is smaller than your cardstock. So the one I'm using today is a floral stamp from Gina Designs. I'm going to close my Misti door and prep my my cardstock with an embossing bag. This ensures that no embossing powder is going to stick, which we know on black cardstock happens far too often. So I'm going to ink this up using Versamark ink or any sort of embossing ink that you may have, and then stamp it down onto my cardstock. You may find you need to stamp it more than once if you hold it up to the light and you notice the areas are not stamped properly. I had to do this especially with the solid areas of the flower, and I think it's really important that when you're stamping a solid area that you push down a little harder on those areas on your Misti. So once you're finished your stamping, you can go ahead and apply your embossing powder. You can see I have a piece of copy paper underneath to catch any of the excess powder. I'm using some super fine white embossing powder from Wow, and I'm just covering my card liberally here, and then you can simply lift up your cardstock, give your cardstock a flip to get any of that extra embossing powder off of your cardstock, and you are ready to heat it. So I'm just going to melt the embossing powder and I'm going to put this panel off to the side. Meanwhile, grabbing my white piece of cardstock this time, I'm stamping the flower in some black ink, and it's going to be in the exact same spot as I stamped on the black panel. This step here was completely optional, and I'm going ahead and adding a stitching die. So what this is it doesn't actually cut anything out, it adds a stitching pattern into my cardstock. I want to be able to do this on both panels equally, so I've lined them both up exactly one on top of the other, and I'm going to attach the die, of course, with some tape so it doesn't move, and I'm going to feed it through the machine at the exact same time, and that way it's going to cut the stitching into both panels in the exact same spot. So I'm feeding it through my machine, and when I take it up and remove all of them, you can see this cool stitching pattern here. So the next thing you're going to do is grab each of these panels and you're going to cut them in half on the length size. So you're going to cut them at 2 3/4 inches, both panels the exact same way. And this is going to allow you to be able to have one card using one black and white side and the other card using another. A completely optional step is to trim a 1/4 inch off of each of the sides except the middle part that you just cut, so the top and bottom and then the left side of your cardstock. Again, completely optional depending on how you want to do this. Originally my intention was to grab a rectangle die and cut through both of them so they would be a bit smaller, but that stitching die ended up being completely different than what I thought it would be. So gather up all 4 of your pieces here and you'll see that all your black and white panels now match together, and you have created technically enough for 2 cards. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my card bases, 2 of them. They measure 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 when they're folded. Off screen, I've also gone ahead and cut 2 panels. So both of them measured 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 like the ones in the beginning, and I just simply cut them in half, one white and one black. And now I have a frame to go around each of the black and white panels. So each one of those little squares that I just measured is 2 3/4 by 4 1/4. So you're going to secure those black and white plain panels that you just cut, one with black on the left and one with black on the right on both of the card bases. And whether you want to put the white one on either side is up to you. Because your card base is white, it's not really necessary, but if you want to keep the same height of the cardstock, then you're going to need panels for that. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some tape runner onto the back of both my stamped panels, and I'm going to add them side by side, carefully lining them up. Lastly, I just need to add my sentiment. I am using a thanks die here, and I'm going to be cutting that out in black and white as well. I'm going to cut each piece out 2 times in black and white cardstock so that I have enough for both of the cards. When I'm finished cutting those out, I'm going to use some Connect glue, which is a glue pen. It allows me to glue smaller die cuts like this one, and I'm going to attach the sentiment on top of the shadow background. When I'm all finished, I'm going to attach them into the center of each of the cards, and that is our first technique and cards done. So here are both cards. You can see that you're pretty much doing the same steps each time, and it's being really quick to create 2 simple cards. The next techniques are going to be more obvious ways of getting 2-for-1 cards out of each one. So let's continue with the next one, which is the alcohol lift technique. I'm going to grab a piece of Yupo paper. This is paper specifically designed for alcohol inks, and my panel measures 4 by 5¼ inches. I'm going ahead and adding a felt pad to my blending tool, and I'm grabbing some alcohol inks to start off with. I'm adding some of the alcohol inks into the felt by squeezing the tube just a little bit. A little bit goes a long way when it comes to working with alcohol inks. I also decided to add a little of my white alcohol ink as well, just to add some interest. Then I'm going to go along and just swipe back and forth and kind of twist and turn my tool and give it just pats. I'm not swiping at all, I'm just literally going up and down and twisting as I go. This will give you a little better of a look as to what I'm doing as I'm going along. And I'm filling in all the white space as I feel is necessary until I'm happy with the background. You could add as many layers as you like, but just remember that the more layers you add, the more time it's going to take to dry. So I'm grabbing my Misti stamping tool now and my alcohol ink panel now that I'm happy with it, and I'm laying down this Peony stamp from Picket Studios, and I'm just going to twirl it around here so I can stamp in this corner easily. Keep a piece of plain white cardstock in the exact same size as your panel. My panel measures 4 by 5¼ right now, so I have a piece of white cardstock you can see off to the left for this. Now I'm using a specific ink pad dedicated for this technique. It's called the Alcohol Lift ink. And so what I've done is I've gone ahead and stamped it as usual. It's clear, just like embossing ink is. And I'm going to stamp down onto my panel and push down. And then I'm going to quickly switch panels. So I'm going to insert my white panel now in, and I'm going to stamp the access that's on top of the stamp now. So when it lifts the stamp off the cardstock with the alcohol ink, it lifts the ink off of it, and you're able to stamp with the white cardstock. I ended up reapplying the ink and stamping it onto my white cardstock 3 times in total, really just to make sure that enough ink was on there so you would know what it is. So now I have my 2 panels. I'm going to set the panel with the white cardstock off to the side. That's all finished, it's stamped. But in order to get the alcohol lift ink to really show up quite vibrantly and to really be able to see that flower in there, I'm going to grab either a microfiber cloth or a paper towel. You're going to start by just blotting it down onto the ink, and then you can go ahead and you can actually give it a bit of a rub. And as you do this, you're going to be able to see more of the ink showing up. So you can see how much of a difference that made by adding just some paper towel or a microfiber cloth there and buffing out the ink. You can really see the peony stamped on both of these. And remember, I'm actually making my cards this way rather than from the top. So I'm going ahead and I'm attaching these onto some card panels. Again, they're a little bit bigger than the panels themselves, so it gives a nice little white frame around them. And I'm just using some tape runner to adhere these. So I've gone ahead and die cut 2 birthday wishes sentiments. I've already adhered the one that I cut out in white cardstock. And for my white panel here, I'm going to attach it in black cardstock, once again using that Connect glue. And another little quick tip is to use an acrylic block to hold down fine, intricate pieces like this. It really makes a difference, and it saves you some time as well from holding it down with your fingers and getting them all sticky and full of glue. To add just a little bit of extra something to the card, I've gone in with some purple stone drops and some black vintage drops. And I've just added a couple of the drops onto my panels here just to add a little bit of an embellishment. I felt like the white needed a little extra something. And here's a final look at both of those cards. So let's move on to technique number 3. Now, I have a question for you. You can answer below in the comments. What is the one thing that always seems to be slipping into your crafty cart when you're doing some shopping? Is it stamps? Is it dies? Is it paper? What is the thing that you seem to always be buying? For me lately, it seems to be I've been on a bit of a kick with drops and pastes and all sorts of things to be doing more techniques with. And in the past, it's always been stamps. So I'm actually going to be creating two of these panels here. One is for the next technique for the card and one is for this one. And I'm using 3 colors of distress ink to do my ink blending here. I'm using an ink blending tool from scrapbook.com, and I'm going in a circular motion and I'm going back and forth between each color just to get a really pretty blend, making sure that each one of them ends very softly so the next color can come in and blend perfectly. Now, because this video tutorial is not about ink blending, I went really quickly for that there. And if you want to see more ink blending tutorials, I have a ton of them on my channel. So I'm going to grab this Just a Note die and I'm going to place it strategically on my cardstock so it's in the middle both from left to right and top to bottom. It's quite a large die, and this is where I find this technique works really well, is when it's with a large sentiment die. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine, and I'm going to die cut the same panel in white cardstock as well. So this Just a Note die is going to be cut out using the blended background and the white cardstock. There's no need for them to be in the exact same place, so don't give that too much of a worry. So when I'm finished running that through my die cutting machine, I'm going to grab this negative panel, so the area around the Just a Note, and I'm going to place this onto my card panel. I'm going to do the same thing with the one from the white cardstock. So I've die cut this in white as well, and I'm adding a whole bunch of glue in the center of my letters, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the white die cuts from my white panel here that I've cut out. Now don't forget the centers of the O's and the A's to add back in those colored areas so that you can really tell what the letters actually say. If you forget about those panels and leave them white, it's going to look a little bit funny. Now this die is really perfect for this technique because it's not intricate, they're nice big pieces, you don't really need to worry too much about getting everything perfect and trying to figure out which piece goes where. Every piece is very unique and large and they're easy to place in. You're going to do the same thing now with the white panel, so you're going to add in all of the colored pieces this time, and then you're going to have 2 cards out of essentially 1 colored panel and 1 piece of white cardstock. So really, really fun to do, and as I said, if you were going to die cut this anyway out of some colored cardstock, you might as well get 2 cards out of it. So here's a final look at both of those panels, super fun and easy to make. Now we're going on to our very last technique here, which is also a really awesome technique, and it's kind of built off of the one we just did. The only difference is we're going to be taking it up a little bit. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stamp my floral stamp here onto a white card panel. This one here measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so a standard A2 size panel. I'm going to ink it up twice to get it nice and black, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp the same thing onto a colored background. Remember in the last technique I said I created 2 of those colored backgrounds, so I would have enough for this technique too. So once again, double stamping to ensure the darkest stamping possible. Now I'm going to grab some circle nesting dies. These can be from any brand, any size, as long as you have quite a few sizes. Now I'm using these from Tonic, which are now retired, but you can use the ones from Waffle Flower that I've listed below in the video description. And I'm grabbing every second one so that I have about a centimeter or 1/4 to 1/2 an inch between each of those circles. And I'm trying to line them up as perfectly as possible so that they're all one within each other and the spaces are the same size in between. I'm going to grab a large piece of purple tape and lay it over top so these dies are stuck in place. I'm going to place this over my colored panel as well as my black and white panel. Once again, doing the same thing as I did before. I'm wrapping the purple tape around both panels to ensure that they stick together when I pull them through the die cutting machine. If you're using a Gemini Junior die cutting machine or even a Big Shot, it should be able to cut through both panels. You may want to run it through the machine twice though. So I'm going to grab each one of those frames that we just cut out with the stamped image on them and attach them to a card base. They're 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so they should fit directly over top of each of the bases. Okay, so once those are glued on top, then you can go ahead and start alternating between the circles. Remember, you cut them out in the same way so they all have the exact same print on them. You just need to line them up. Now, what is also super helpful is having this full stamped image off to the side so you have it as a reference point so that it's really easy to line up and you can see where each area really needs to go. So on the colored frame, I started with the black and white piece, and on the white frame, I started with the colored piece, and then you're going to alternate in between. You could add tape runner or some liquid glue in the centers, whichever you prefer. I ended up using both just to ensure extra stickiness. And again, just lining up each one of them so that all the lines really work. The more intricate the stamp, the more difficult this one's going to be. So if your first time trying this technique, maybe use a floral stamp or a large image stamp that doesn't have too many details, so it's easy to line up. But if you do use one that has a lot of details and you make a mistake, it's less likely to tell that there's a mistake. When you use a really simple image, it might be more apparent. So I'm just adding the last piece now, and then I'm going to go ahead and add my sentiment to the front of each card. I love the way that these turned out. They're really different than my typical style, but I think they look pretty cool. So just added the handwritten thanks die here in black and white. Didn't show that on screen because we've done that technique already. And these cards are all finished. You can take a final look at them both here. Just something really different and unique, I find. All right, thanks so much for watching today's video, everyone. I have a video suggestion below, the best stamps for cards that take only about 5 minutes. If you want to check it out, that would be awesome. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon for another video. Bye for now.